John looked at the scarred Pitbull, bear, and made a choice that haunted him. He called the shelter to take the dog away forever, fearing for his granddaughter Lily's safety. But then, a sudden mountain storm hit, and Lily vanished. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. John watched Bear from across the porch. The dog was a map of past pain, ears notched from old fights, a deep white scar running across his blind eye. To John, a retired man who believed in hard rules, this dog wasn't a pet. He was a ticking time bomb. "He's a monster, Sarah," John barked at his daughter. "Look at those scars. He's going to hurt Lily. I've made the call. They're coming for him at noon." Sarah cried, pleading for the dog she'd rescued from a fighting ring, but John wouldn't listen. He saw Bear move toward 5-year-old Lily, who was playing with her dolls. Bear let out a low, rumbling huff. John saw it as a threat. He stepped between them, his heart racing, his hand trembling. He was protecting his family, or so he thought. But as the clock ticked toward noon, the sky over the Montana hills turned a bruised purple. A freak summer blizzard was rolling in, fast and cold. In the rush to close the shutters, the back door clicked open. Lily, lured by the sight of a tiny fawn at the edge of the woods, stepped out into the biting wind. By the time John turned around, the house was silent. Lily was gone, and so was Bear. The silence that followed was deafening. John stood in the kitchen, the phone cord dangled as the shelter worker's voice crackled on the other end. "Sir, are you there? We're 10 minutes out." John dropped the phone. The wind began to howl, rattling the window panes like old bones. You might think you know what a hero looks like, but sometimes the hero is the one we fear the most. Stay with me, because what John finds in those woods will change everything. John grabbed his heavy coat and his old hunting rifle. His boots crunched on the fresh, frozen crust of the snow. "Lily!" he screamed, but the wind swallowed her name. His mind raced with terrifying thoughts. A child couldn't survive long in these temperatures. As he reached the tree line, he saw something that made his blood turn to ice. It wasn't just the cold he had to worry about. Pressed into the soft mud beneath the snow were huge, heavy tracks. They weren't dog tracks. They were round, wide, and deep. A mountain lion, a big one. The local rangers had warned about a ghost cat in the area, a cougar that had lost its fear of humans. John's heart hammered against his ribs. He followed the tracks, his eyes darting between the shadows of the pines. Every snap of a twig sounded like a bone breaking. Then he saw a flash of movement, a patch of gray fur. He raised his rifle, his scope searching the brush. But it wasn't the lion. It was a doe standing frozen in the thicket. She looked at John with wide, soulful eyes before limping away. She was hurt, her side torn as if by giant claws. The realization hit John like a physical blow. The predator was close. It was hunting. And his little Lily was out here, somewhere in the white dark, defenseless. He found a scrap of Lily's pink sweater snagged on a thorn. Just inches away was a massive paw print, overlapping a small boot print. The lion was trailing his granddaughter. "Please, God," John whispered, his breath coming in ragged gas. He pushed deeper into the ravine, the snow now up to his knees. The fear wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was a weight, pressing the air out of his lungs. He felt old, weak, and utterly alone. He had sent away the only thing that might have had the instinct to find her. He had called Bear a monster, but the real monster was out here in the dark, and it was hungry. John stumbled and fell into a drift. He sat there for a moment, the cold seeping into his bones. He looked at his hands, the hands that had signed the paper to give Bear away. He felt a wave of shame so deep it hurt more than the frostbite. Rehook. John was ready to give up. But the forest had one more secret to reveal, and it started with a sound no human could ever make. A low, guttural roar echoed through the canyon. It wasn't the scream of a cougar. It was the defiant, chest-deep bark of a dog. Bear. John scrambled to his feet, his adrenaline surging. He followed the sound, his rifle held tight. He reached a rocky clearing and stopped dead. There, near the mouth of an old cave, stood the scarred Pitbull. Bear looked terrifying. His fur was matted with ice and blood. His teeth were bared, and his one good eye was fixed on a ledge above. John looked up and saw the mountain lion. It was massive, 150 pounds of muscle and hate, perched on a rock, ready to spring. And there, huddled in the shallow opening of the cave behind the dog, was Lily. She was shivering, her face pale, but she was alive. John raised his rifle, aiming at the cougar, but the wind was too strong, the snow blurring his vision. "Bear, get back!" John yelled. He thought the dog was going to bolt. He thought the monster would save himself. Instead, Bear did something John never expected. He didn't wait for the lion to jump. Bear leaped first. The two animals collided in midair. It was a blur of tan fur and black muscle. They rolled down the embankment, a chaotic mess of growls and snarls. The mountain lion was faster, its claws raking across Bear's chest, opening new wounds over the old ones. But Bear wouldn't let go. He clamped his jaws onto the lion's thick neck and held on with a grip born of 1,000 lifetimes of pain. John ran toward the cave, his heart in his throat. He reached Lily and scooped her up. "I've got you, baby. I've got you." But as he turned to run back toward the house, he heard a sickening yelp. He looked back. The mountain lion had managed to pin Bear against a jagged rock. The cat's claws were buried deep in the dog's side. Bear was losing. He was smaller, weaker, and already exhausted from the cold. John knew he had to act. He set Lily down behind a tree. "Stay here, don't move." He stepped toward the fight. The mountain lion hissed, its golden eyes turning toward John. It left the bleeding dog and crouched low, its tail twitching. It was going to charge. John leveled the rifle, but his hands were shaking so hard he couldn't find the trigger. Just as the lion bunched its muscles to leap at John, Bear dragged himself up. With a final agonizing surge of strength, the dog threw himself at the lion's hind legs, tripping the predator. The lion spun around, lunging at Bear's throat. Crack! The sound of the rifle shot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. The mountain lion slumped over, its body sliding down into the snowy creek bed. Silence returned to the woods, heavier than before. John dropped the gun and ran to the dog. Bear was lying in the red-stained snow. His breathing was shallow. His tail gave one tiny, weak thump against the ground. "Oh no," John whispered, falling to his knees. "No, no, no. I'm sorry, Bear. I'm so sorry." He saw the damage. The lion had nearly torn the dog apart. Bear's eyes, usually so full of guarded suspicion, were now soft. He looked at John, then he looked past him at Lily. He let out a tiny, contented sigh. He had done his job. He had kept the monster away from his family, even if the monster was himself. Trigger down, John pulled off his heavy coat and wrapped it around the dying dog. He gathered both the child and the animal into his arms, feeling the warmth of the dog's blood against his chest. He began the long trek back, his tears blurring the path. John made it back to the porch, but the shelter truck was already there. What happens next is a moment that everyone in that small town still talks about today. When John emerged from the tree line, he looked like a ghost. He was carrying Lily in one arm and the bundle of his coat containing Bear in the other. Sarah screamed and ran to them. The shelter workers, two men in tan uniforms, stepped forward with a leash and a cage. "We're here for the Pitbull, sir," one said, his voice hesitant. John looked at the man. His face was set like flint. "Get that cage out of my sight," John growled. "This dog isn't going anywhere. Call the vet, now." They rushed into the house. The local vet, Dr. Miller, arrived 20 minutes later. The kitchen table became a makeshift operating room. Lily sat in the corner, refused to change out of her wet clothes, clutching Bear's favorite old tennis ball. The hours dragged on. Dr. Miller's face was grim. "He's lost a lot of blood, John, and he's old. His heart might not take the stitches." John stood by the window. He looked out at the edge of the woods. There, standing exactly where the lion had first appeared, was the injured doe from earlier. She wasn't alone. A tiny, wobbly fawn stood beside her. The mother had survived the lion's earlier attack. She had stayed alive for her baby. John felt a jolt of hope. If that mother could survive the ghost cat, maybe Bear could too. He realized then that nature wasn't just about predators and prey. It was about the fierce, unbreakable bond of protection. Bear wasn't a fighting dog. He was a guardian. He had always been a guardian. Suddenly, the monitor in the kitchen began to beep rapidly. I'm losing him, Dr. Miller shouted. His heart is stopping. Sarah let out a sob. Lily ran to the table and grabbed Bear's limp paw. Wake up, Bear, she cried. Wake up. John felt the world tilting. He reached out and touched the dog's scarred head. Please, son, he whispered, calling him son for the first time. Don't leave us. I haven't told you thank you yet. The room went silent. The beeping stopped. A long, flat tone filled the kitchen. John closed his eyes, the weight of 1,000 regrets crushing him. He had finally seen the truth, and he had seen it too late. Then a small, wet sound. A lick. John opened his eyes. Bear's tongue had flicked out just once across Lily's hand. The monitor gave a slow, rhythmic thump-thump. He's back, the doctor breathed, wiping sweat from his brow. The old warrior is back. The tension broke like a dam. Sarah and John clung to each other, weeping with a relief so violent it shook their frames. The shelter workers quietly packed their things and left, leaving behind a blank form on the counter. John picked it up and tore it into 100 pieces. Rehook. But the story doesn't end with a saved dog. It ends with a saved man. You won't believe what John did the following spring. 6 months later, the Montana sun was high and golden. The scars on Bear's side had healed into thick silver lines, adding to the map of his bravery. He didn't walk with a limp anymore. He walked with a strut. John was no longer the man who sat on the porch with a frown. He had spent the winter building something. Not a fence to keep things out, but a sanctuary to bring things in. He had turned his back pasture into a rescue for unadoptable dogs. The scarred ones, the old ones, the ones the world called monsters. On this day, the whole town had gathered. They were dedicating the new kennel. John stood at the podium, Bear sitting proudly at his side wearing a bright red bandana. I used to think I knew what made a dog good, John told the crowd, his voice thick with emotion. I thought it was a clean coat and a gentle bark. I was wrong. Goodness isn't about what you haven't done. It's about what you're willing to do when the world gets dark. He looked down at Bear. The dog looked up, his one good eye shining with an intelligence that seemed almost human. I called this dog a monster, John said, his voice cracking. But he saved my granddaughter. He saved my soul. He taught me that a scar is just a place where a miracle happened. Lily ran up and hugged Bear's neck. The dog let out that same low, rumbling huff John had once feared. But now John knew what it meant. It was a promise. I am here. You are safe. The crowd erupted in applause, but John didn't hear them. He only felt the warm fur of the dog under his hand. He looked toward the woods. The doe and her fawn, now half-grown, watched from the shadows before disappearing into the green. The ghost cat was gone. The fear was gone. In its place was a love so powerful it had rewritten the ending of a story that should have been a tragedy. Trigger down and final release. John walked off the stage and sat in the grass with Lily and Bear. He watched the wind ripple through the long grass. He realized that for the first time in years, his heart wasn't uneasy. The storm had passed, and it had left behind a beauty he never thought he'd see again. He leaned his head against Bear's, and the old dog leaned back. They were both scarred. They were both survivors, and they were finally truly home. Stories like Bear's remind us that there is always hope, even in the darkest woods. If this story touched your heart, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear about the miracle animals in your life. And if you're ready for more journeys of rescue and redemption, click the video on your screen right now. We have so many more heroes to introduce you to. Thank you for watching, and remember, never judge a heart by its scars.